Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to OBR Weekly. I'm Barry. I'm the web dork. He's the legend. He's Fred Greetham. How you doing, Fred?
Doing as good as you can be. A
As
week
good as
from
you
the
can be.
draft,
Yeah.
ready to get it over with.
I think we're all at that point now. Let's just get it over. Let's get it done with. Let's move on. Let's
Then we can
hopefully
start
have some excitement.
complaining.
Exactly. Exactly. Or claiming that we predicted and said, all along, we knew who they were going to take. It was never a mystery. But as always, before we get into it, the usual disclaimer. This show is driven by your comments and questions more than anything else. I've brought along some slides. We're going to walk through them and all that. But back half of the show is all your comments and questions, and front half of the show sometimes is your comments and questions. So feel free to hit us up. Timothy Campbell already has in the YouTube chat room, and we will mark your comments and get back to them here at some point during the program. But right now, Fred and I are going to review some of the news of the week, starting with the big news, which is that Joe Flacco has returned to the Cleveland Browns on a new contract. Joe seems the same as ever. If you look at his stats from 2023 and 2024, they are remarkably similar. Joe Flacco is Joe Flacco. He had a bad year with the Jets, but with the Browns and Colts, pretty consistent. Fred, are you pretty assured of what Joe Flacco is going to be able to bring to the table here in 2025?
No, I think he's pretty consistent. I mean, he's 18-year veteran, so what you see is what you get. I don't
Yep.
expect, to extrapolate those numbers that he put up in 5 games. Um, but it's encouraging. I think it gives a little bit of a um, hope, to the fan base, a little familiarity. I'm still not very excited about the quarterback room. Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco. You got an 18-year veteran. Even if he lit up the world, he's 40 years old. You
Mm-hmm.
still got to go to the future. Um, and Kenny Pickett, you're kind of hoping you get Sam Darnold 2.0, is the way I look at it.
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised that the Flacco move came when it did. I don't know all the details, but I don't know why they just didn't wait till after the draft, and then okay, we need to get I had him coming to the Browns after the draft if they drafted a starting quarterback like Shador Sanders, or if they thought Jackson Dart was ready, at some point as a rookie. I did not think that they would sign him. They weren't in any hurry. The only thing I can feel is that there was some pressure, you know, either from his camp or some other team, possibly, you know, because, he was just there. I don't know if he had a market, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem. I don't see any downside to it. I think it becomes insurance that if you come out of this draft with nothing at quarterback, and I'm talking about a non-starter, I'm not talking about a developmental guy. So
Right.
there's only a couple of the starter, guys. So at least you have two options in Pickett and Flacco. I still was holding hope out that they would go get Cousins. At first, I thought this signaled they weren't going to do that. But when you look at the dollars, Flacco's getting 3 million guaranteed. Pickett's getting 2.6 million guaranteed. Even if you didn't get a quarterback in the draft and you were able somehow, if the Falcons decided to cut and eat the contract with Cousins, or they traded him and said, we'll eat, you know, whatever amount of the salary and give us a low draft pick and we'll call it a day. If they could get him for 1.2 million, then it's not a problem having all three on the roster. But
Right.
you could always cut one of these guys if need be. So I don't see any downside to it. but we really don't know. They haven't said. I think they should still explore the Cam Ward and just make sure that the Titans are totally committed to him. They might have moved down on their asking price, but if he goes to the Titans, then it's going to come down to what really does Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski feel about Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It really comes down to do they believe they're a franchise quarterback? And if they believe they are, they take them at 2 because there's
Right.
no guarantee that you cannot say, well, he's not good enough at number 2, but we'll take him at 9 or 15 or whatever, because then, yeah, you're going to miss out on one of those top other players, but there's no guarantee you're going to get the guy. And then you're going to be sitting here at this time last year or next year saying who the Browns going to draft at quarterback, because it'll be right back to the same thing.
Yeah. Well, Fred, you are one of the few voices still out there sort of saying if you really want a quarterback at 2, go and get your guy. Everybody else seems to say, well, it seems like it's 75% it's going to be Travis Hunter and 25% say it's going to be Abdul Carter, and that's pretty much it. I'm guessing you don't think that the acquisition of Flacco is going to have any impact on the draft at all, right?
No. I mean, he's just, everybody's looking at it as he's going to be a Pro Bowler and he's going to lead him to the Super Bowl because of what he did in those 5 games. Believe me, that was the most fun I had, covering this team since 99, that 5-week stretch that came to a thud, in the playoffs. But I'm not taking anything away from him, but part of it was, he didn't have all year the off-season program, all those things that everybody said he didn't have. He came off the couch, but one thing he did have, he was fresh, and there's something to be said about that. But no, I'm just saying they got to solve the quarterback problem. You don't make it, you don't force it, but I don't have a crystal ball. I know most of the people on our site are anti Shedeur Sanders. In fact, they're anti most of the quarterbacks, in the draft. And that could be. But like I said, you just can't go on like this and say, well, next year we'll solve it, because you're going to be in the same boat again. You're probably going to win enough games to get you out of the top 5, and that's going to be too late, to get somebody. So it's, I don't know totally the answer. I don't know. I just felt like it buys you more time having a better quarterback. I think Kirk Cousins still better than Joe Flacco, and he's younger. I think Derek Carr, if he became available and his shoulder's okay, if the Saints draft one, that's another one to look at, because they're better than what you got right now.
Yeah. Don't you think, though, even with, Flacco and Pickett maybe not being the most impressive quarterback room, the team last year would have won a couple more games with those guys, because at least they would have gotten over that 17-point barrier, once or twice, right, Fred?
No, they would have won more games if they would have stayed with Jameis Winston. I mean, you can't tell me the offense was worse with when you saw what DTR and Bailey Zappi did. I think I'm not accusing them of tanking, but I think they could have won a couple more games and they wouldn't have the number 2 pick. Everybody's glad they have it now, but I don't think anybody was excited about a 3-14 season. Yeah. So, I mean, it really, the turnovers killed them, even obviously with Winston. That's why he's not here. But yeah, they could have won more. They're not maybe 11-6 team that they were. They're not a 3-14. That's what I'm saying. If Flacco and Pickett play adequate, I mean, they're very likely to be more in the 7-10, 8-9 range than 3-14. And where's that going to get you? Right where the Steelers are, without a quarterback answer and drafting in the 20s.
Yep.
Or 15 to 20, something like that. So that's the predicament they're in. Even if they had all the money in the world, because they didn't have the Watson deal, I still don't see how you're going to get that franchise quarterback unless you're picking at the top of the draft, because nobody lets them go. The only way they let them go is like what you saw, King's ransom, and there's a big problem with Deshaun Watson. That's why the Browns took that big swing and a miss.
Yep. Yeah. Franchise quarterbacks, do not come around very often, and the Browns thought they had one. Didn't turn out that way. Just one last question on Flacco, Fred. Between Flacco and Pickett, do you think Flacco's like the incumbent, or do you think that we're going to see a legitimate quarterback battle if the room remains the same?
Just here before they've even started OTAs or any offseason, I would say the Browns favor Pickett over Flacco.
Okay.
I think they would rather him be the starter because at least you have a chance. But with that said, they could very well, if they draft a guy who's not a day one starter, they could very well start the season with Flacco, because it's easier to bench Flacco than it would be to bench Pickett, and ever go back to him. If you start Flacco and he struggles or gets hurt, it's easier to bring in, the backup guy's always the favorable one. And I really do think the Browns are much higher on Pickett than you and I might be.
Right. Right.
I mean, Andrew Berry, we saw with the Steelers, and I think most of us that cover the team, but definitely the fans of the Browns, as long as they felt like Pickett was the quarterback of the Steelers, that they weren't going anywhere. And so now after you had that kind of pounded into you, to see him your starting quarterback, that's a kind of a tough pill to swallow. I mean, people are starting to go, well, maybe in the Kevin Stefanski offense, and maybe he will be much better. But how do you get around? We call it, talked about how small his hands were and all the things, about what he was doing with the Steelers. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, but if it was today, I would think that Pickett would beat out Flacco. He's got much more going for him, at least the youth and all that. But for the reason of not wanting to bench him and go to Flacco, they could start the season with Flacco and then turn to him if they don't feel like there's a rookie ready to go.
Right. And we'll see what kind of machinations there are after the Browns get through the draft and get through Cousins' availability to see, what that final quarterback room looks like. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about, who's the likely starter and that sort of thing there. But in the meantime, we can talk about Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter wants his cake and he wants to eat it as well. It's one of my problems. But he basically said about playing a single position, it's never playing football again because I've been doing it my whole life and I love being on the football field. I feel like I could dominate each side of the ball, so I really enjoy doing it. I don't know how to interpret that comment, Fred. It sounds vaguely threatening, like he's going to refuse to play football if you don't let him play both ways. On the other hand, he might just be saying he really enjoys playing both ways and it wouldn't feel like football to him if he couldn't. I don't know how to interpret it, but does this worry you at all, this kind of a statement?
Well, I don't even know what it's never playing football again. I don't know, why he didn't say I'm never playing. That's what it seems like. It's never, doesn't make sense. But no, I mean, is he going to, if they don't put him in on defense or on offense, is he going to just go home and pout and not collect his paycheck? I mean, come on. People say things in the moment. To me, I don't think the guy has to be 100% offense or 100% defense. I mean, I think he's 188 pounds. He's pretty light. Why wouldn't you just use him predominantly on one side or the other, but then pick your spots so you're not worn down, I mean, all I really want out of Denzel Ward is shutting down like a Jamar Chase or their top receiver from catching the ball. I don't want him tackling guys. And, every time he seems to lower his head, he gets, a concussion. And I could see the same thing with Hunter. You want him to cover guys and lock down guys. Why wouldn't you put him out there only in passing situations? Obviously
Mm-hmm.
teams can run, but he's out there to be a lockdown cover guy.
Right.
And with teams throwing the ball, it seems to make sense that he doesn't have to be out there every down. Why wouldn't he be out there, for sure on third down and passing situations? But, you play him before that, that's fine too. On offense, again, I think it makes more sense to be on the field more on offense because you don't really have a number 2 receiver, and he might be your number 1 receiver. So why in the world wouldn't you have a playmaker be more of a playmaker and put him in situations to make plays? So that's the whole thing why he's so appealing. If he was
Right.
only a wide receiver, I doubt if he'd get picked number 2. I doubt if he was a cornerback only, he would get picked number 2. But because he does them both, that's why he would be picked number 2. That doesn't
Right.
mean, with the Browns analytics, they're not gonna play him 100% every down on offense and 100% on defense. I would totally be shocked if they did that because you're
Right.
going to wear the guy down. See what he can handle and then let him have a little more. Maybe he can do it all, but yeah, I wouldn't do it at the exist of his career. We complained about Nick Chubb not being on the field all the time, but their analytics were saying, forget the injury, but non-injury, he could have, his career was probably extended some because
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't getting the ball 100 times a game like some other backs did.
Yeah. The notion of Travis Hunter running into a Nick Chubb type running back doesn't play well in my mind, for that sort of an investment. But, you think that, well, most likely scenarios, he's playing wide receiver. He comes in as a number 2 wide receiver, plays some on obvious passing situations in defense. It's still a lot of fun, and that's, still very effective. I think that Travis Hunter, based on what I've read and what little I've seen, he's a guy who makes quarterbacks look better. And, we've talked about the 25 years of agony with the Cleveland Browns not having a good quarterback. But don't you think, a guy like Travis Hunter, who catches anything that's near him, rarely drops the ball, isn't he a guy who made not only Shedeur Sanders look better, but would make Flacco or Pickett look a lot better?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could argue that you're getting the best player in the draft. They always say we want to get the best player available. Our lads had Hunter at 9.8 grade and Abdul Carter 9.79, so they're very close. But the reason I said I tend to lean on offense because they need more offense,
Mm-hmm.
and the plus is that he could play defense. And if he's a lockdown corner, doesn't that help your defense? It makes
Yeah.
the defensive ends look better because they can get to the quarterback besides Myles Garrett. So that's kind of the reasoning there. Yes. But that could be some of the argument that why Shedeur Sanders had such great numbers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I did look at though our lads, they have Cam Ward they have him like 9.58 first round pick. Shedeur Sanders 9.52 first round
Mm-hmm.
pick. So
Right.
not everybody has them as not being a first round or that great of a quarterback. And that's where it'll come down to what the Browns think.
Right. Right. It's going to be a very interesting decision at number 2. Got a question a little bit earlier. Let me see if I can find it. I want to answer it. Oh yeah, from Fumble, asking about what we're going to be doing next week. Next week, OBR Weekly will not be on the air. We're going to take a break before that 3-day marathon that we're going to embark into. But on Wednesday night, what we're going to do is we're going to have a draft preview where each of us on the staff, and we've got a pretty good sized staff, each of us is going to go out there and for a couple of minutes talk about who we would pick at number 2. So you're going to get, everyone's opinion. And I can tell you already, it's not going to be Travis Hunter, Travis Hunter, Travis Hunter. So I think you'll want to stay tuned for it, or be tuned in next Wednesday night at 7. We call it 2 QB or not 2 QB. That is the question. And I don't think there's going to be many people picking QBs, but going to be interesting. That's what we're doing next Wednesday. So, just one more thing on Travis, Fred. He talks about playing both ways. Don't you think at the NFL level, the mental aspect of the game is a lot more complicated at each position, that it wouldn't be as easy to play both sides of the field because you have to learn 2 positions at the NFL level, quite different from the competition that Travis Hunter was facing with Colorado's schedule, and just as simply more complexity everywhere. I think that would be a challenge for him.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the best athletes in the world, at this level. And, there's probably nobody that could really run with him on offense, nor, that he had to cover that could get away from speed wise and quickness and all that. I heard him ask if Travis Hunter was covering Travis Hunter, who would win. And he said they'd both win. But when you look at that, I mean, I think off the wide receiver would be a little more complicated, in my opinion, at the NFL level, because you have to learn the reads on the, different on which way to cut, especially the choice routes or whatever you're running, if they're still doing that or something to that effect. Whereas defense, it's what I've always said at corner, said in man-to-man, it's like, okay, you see that guy, number 7, you guard him wherever he goes. I mean, I know there's techniques, but that's what I said, the valuableness, more versatility. The Jim Schwartz could literally have, Denzel Ward locking down one side and Travis Hunter locking down the other side. Sure, teams run the third receiver and so forth, but that's where you then could use your third or fourth corner instead of, having your starter and your depth, is pushed. So, yeah, I think so. And I think it's all going to be how, obviously if he's done that at this level all the way along, he's pretty bright. And so it's going to be how quick he picks this all up. And he's, like college, he's going to be starting here, in a couple weeks in the off-season program. So they practice all spring, summer, training camp. I think he'll well know the offense or the defense, but I think you just got to see, you don't want to overwhelm him. This guy's done it on his athletic ability. You could probably, without a playbook, offense or defense, he could just go out there and get open on offense, and he could probably shut down the other. With all the nuances in the NFL, when you're covering wide receivers that are much stronger and bigger and faster than they were at Jackson State or at Colorado. And same thing on offense, getting away from the corners. So I think they'll just have to, that's what the whole offseason training camp, practicing against the Panthers in joint practices and practicing against the Super Bowl champion Eagles. That's the things you're going to do, or Vikings or whoever they're practicing against. Those are the things you're going to be able to say, okay, you can handle it. Or he would probably be the first to say, this is a little different than more than I can chew, so.
Right. Well, everything I, have read and heard is that he eats and breathes football, so maybe if anyone can do it, he can. One thing that's been speculated, this comes from Todd McShay, and you see Todd McShay's draft there on the right. He has the Cleveland Browns taking Travis Hunter, but then trading back up with Atlanta to number 15 spot to pick Shadur Sanders. To me, that's a significant investment to trade up to 15 from 33 and get Shadur Sanders. I don't know what you're giving up. I don't know if you're giving up a first or a second, or what the heck you're giving up to get that. But that's quite an investment. But don't you think if you brought in Shadur Sanders here to add to this quarterback room that we would have a very complex situation, in terms of who the starting quarterback is going to be? Because Sanders is clearly a rookie, maybe unlike Milroe, who would come in here and expect to start day one.
Yeah, I mean he would get a chance to show what he has and if he's ready. But let me ask you this. Would you want him to go to the Steelers? I mean, would you think that would be great for the Browns because now they've committed to Shadur Sanders for the long term? Or would you be afraid that he would light it up and then, he's going to be like you saw, Ben Roethlisberger, Browns passed him. You saw what he did, or the same thing with like Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. I mean, what would you like to see? Because Steelers are going to probably take somebody at 2021 if they don't trade up, because right now, they got Mason Rudolph until or even if Aaron Rodgers eventually shows up, they've got kind of a similar situation. They got a 41-year-old guy that's probably a 1-year quarterback.
Right. I like Shadur Sanders. He's a very accurate quarterback. I think Travis Hunter helped him quite a great deal out there at Colorado. And I'm afraid anytime the Steelers take anyone, just like the Ravens, that a guy that I sort of had looked beyond is going to be a star for them, because it just seems to happen so frequently. But in my opinion, at 21, they're getting Sanders at about the right spot. They're not getting a tremendous. They're not getting a tremendous bargain. They're taking a little bit of a chance because he didn't play the quality of competition that you see in some of these other guys. So I wouldn't be too paranoid about the Steelers taking him. I would be paranoid about the Browns trading up and giving up their, someone said in the chat, mortgaging their future in order to, get Shadur Sanders, because I just don't think he's, the end all be all at quarterback. But that's just my opinion based on things I've read.
So you'd feel better with Kenny Pickett as your long-term answer?
No, I don't see Kenny Pickett as a long-term answer. I see Kenny Pickett as perhaps a long-term backup. The guy I'm excited about is Jalen Milroe, because I think Jalen Milroe's upside is way up there with his speed, that he can really confuse some people if we can teach him to throw the ball a little bit better. Obviously, I was not impressed when I saw him this year in college, but based on my understanding, his upside is the highest, and so he's the guy I would want to invest in.
Well, and I have him in my last mock draft, but the the Browns are sending a lot of mixed signals. They said they were going back to the Kevin Stefanski drop back passer model. At least that's the moves have appeared with the offensive line guys and with Joe Flacco now and with Kenny Pickett. They traded Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So it looks to me like they had in mind Deshaun Watson, a certain style, and DTR fit that. And now they're going away from that. They get Milroe. That tells me they're going back to a different, more of a mobile, type of quarterback. So that's what I'm not following, what they really, until they make a move, it's very much still up in the air, because I think Jackson Dart would fall more into the Stefanski offense, should we call it that, or Sanders or Ward. Whereas I think Milroe's kind of a different style
beast.
completely.
And as Superfly Rob points out here, I mean, what we have to go on is we have to go on past success with Stefanski, right? By and large, his success has come with the bigger pocket passers, and the mobile QBs that we've tried, DTR and Watson, simply have not worked very well. But has anyone ever asked Stefanski that? Because I think Stefanski is sort of saying, I can work with whoever you give me. If Lamar Jackson's available, I'll figure out an offense to feature Lamar Jackson, right? And if you believe Jalen Milroe's that guy, he'll figure out an offense that'll work with him. It's just that we're all skeptical because we haven't seen that yet.
Well, and that's what, it turned into a trash 2024 season because they scrapped the offense to build one for Deshaun Watson. And was it because the offense was so bad, or was it because the quarterback was so bad? They kind of pivoted when they went away when he got hurt, and it looked like they had a legitimate offense minus the interceptions. I mean, Winston was firing the ball over the field, and guys that we thought, I was skeptical that Jerry Jeudy was any good, or Elijah Moore, or Cedric Tillman, and all of a sudden they all looked like NFL wide receivers, when Winston took over. So
Yeah,
it's just because Stefanski really, like we've talked about at nauseum, he won't pound on the table to tell us that, the style he wants. He's more the guy you said, well, whatever we got, we'll work with. And so that doesn't kind of tell you that you're committed one way or the other, on any of these guys. So what direction are you going to go?
right. So it's going to be interesting. What I'm going to do here is I've got a couple more slides, but let's get to the questions you guys have asked because we got some good questions. And if you have more, please feel free to hit them up. One thing I would say that makes me nervous about Travis Hunter, obviously, is his size. And the one thing that would really help him, I think, personally, is a little core home fitness, of course. Core home fitness makes the world's best adjustable dumbbells. And I think I caught my producer by surprise by launching into that. Thank you, Ian. They make the world's best adjustable dumbbells. It's rated by everyone who matters. We all know this. We've been talking about them week in and week out for the last year. They're a Best Buy by Consumers Reports. So check out corehomefitness.com. They have all kinds of great stuff on their website. They've got the incline benches, the racks, all that stuff. They've also got a ton of videos showing you how to use this equipment, how to get yourself in shape, and how, if you're Travis Hunter, maybe to put on a few pounds, of muscle before you get into this NFL situation that is rapidly coming in his direction. All right. So, World's Fastest says some spam sandwiches along with Core Home Fitness would do the job. There you go. There you go. That's all you need. So, let me jump over to the questions and the comments that I've marked. And the first one comes from Timothy Campbell very early on in the chat, asking what pick do you guys think the Browns should draft a quarterback? So is it first round, second round, later? What do you think, Fred?
Well, the answer is it depends. As it sits right now, I'm not the general manager or the coach. As it sits right now, if Cam Ward's there at 2, I take Cam Ward. So that would be the first pick.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not Cam Ward and I'm not sold on Shedeur Sanders, then I take him at 33. But if you're not sold on any of these guys, you told us you thought they were a good quarterback class, but I don't know what that means. Does that mean it's a good quarterback class, but we just don't want to draft any of them until we get to the third round or lower? Or do we start in the second round? Or do we start in the first round? So I would say right now, with the information I have, I would probably look with the 33rd pick. I don't know if I'd be content to just sit there because in my mind, there's 4 quarterbacks in this draft that are worthy to be picked, high. And one's likely taken at number 1. So that means there's 3 left. And the way things go in the NFL, all 3 of them could get picked in the first round. Doesn't matter that, they shouldn't have, they're not rated high enough. And that's my biggest beef, is that the Giants might not take a quarterback. They might not take Shedeur Sanders, but they went out there, took everybody out there to work him out, I think tomorrow. And why would he be good enough to go 3rd or 6th or 9th, but not 2? If you think he's the guy. So if you don't take him, then that's telling me you do not think he's the guy.
Right, right. And it's a very difficult situation because you've got two, almost what they would call generational prospects available in Carter and Tucker, but it's just not at this point anything that makes sense. The school solution appears to be take one of those um, guys, and then you take Milrow or somebody like that at 33. But you're very right. There may be an explosion of interest in quarterbacks, and Milrow's just not going to be there at 33. But let's say Milrow is there at 33. Do you still go back and consider a quarterback if he's available later, say a Will Howard in the fourth or something like that? Do you just grab guys and hope one of them sticks?
Well, I mean, you have to address playmaker, but you need a tight end, you need a running back or two. I think if you take Hunter, you've addressed wide receiver and cornerback. So I would like to get an edge rusher. One of the other arguments against Carter isn't so much against him, is that there's 7 edge rushers ranked in the top 27 of this
Mm-hmm.
draft. The Browns' second pick is 33. So, yeah, they could all be taken, but you're going to get a first round pick at edge rusher if you take one in the second round.
Right.
There's 10 in the top 50. So 20% of this draft, the top 50 players, according to NFL.com, are edge rushers. And I know Carter's the best, but is Jalen Walker or any Green or any of them other
Mm-hmm.
guys that much worse than Carter?
Right.
I don't
Right.
know. But that's my reasoning. There's not as many on the other, wide receivers and cornerbacks, always a premium position. So that's really where that comes in. If there was 100 wide receivers like Hunter and cornerbacks like Hunter, well, then you take if there's only 2 edge rushers, then you take Carter,
Right.
because of that aspect. So they need several positions, and I just think that you can't you need to get a quarterback you believe in. I don't believe you just take 2 or 3 of them and hope one of them's all right.
Right. Right. I think one of the most interesting things of the last 10 minutes was how I turned Travis Hunter into Tucker. That's what happens when your brain is old. That sort of stuff happens. But sorry
Yeah.
about that. At any rate, Kelly Black asked, do they make any more moves before the draft? Well, they could trade up or trade down before the draft if somebody overwhelms them. Is anything you would see beyond that, Fred?
No, I thought maybe they would announce that they've, signed Nick Chubb to kind of like a feel good story, but that could be something they do after the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really, if you're going to bring him back and he hasn't had, I don't know why you just don't do it. But as far as I don't see any major, I see now any signings they do in free agency would be after the draft, kind of what we call backfill, where, okay, we didn't come out of there with an edge rusher. Now they've added a few of those, but another position, say we don't feel good about maybe tight end, or we need more, whatever there is available, defensive tackles or safeties. That's one that I feel like you need to address safety. You don't even have a starter unless you're counting on Ronnie Hickman.
Right.
And there's 4 or 5 safeties that are veterans that are pretty good that are still in free agency. So I would, and that's one that doesn't match up well with the draft. They only have 2 safeties ranked in the top 50.
Right.
One's 15th overall and one's 29th. So you'd probably have to use one of your 33rd pick on a safety if you're looking them to be a starter. But I think they would then look and, okay, let's go get Blackman or Simmons, or there's about 4 or 5 available right now. So
Mhm.
I think that's how they will approach it. But you have to, on those 5 top picks, I think 5 in the first 104 picks, you need to get four starters out of that. I think,
Yeah.
out of the 5, you got to get some impact players. And I think I'd like to see at least 3 on offense. I'd like to see a home run hitting running back. I'd like to see, assuming they take Hunter, they might not need to get a wide receiver, but a quarterback, tight end. And that's where you get the premium players is
Yep.
in the first 4 rounds.
Yep. So they've got a lot of work to do, and they've got to hit. This next question from Chef Brian K, also by the way, a YouTube content creator. I watched him cook some stuff last week. He says, instead of being worse with 2 more years of aging, is it possible that with a full off-season camp, Hunter added, and more time with the offensive line, do you think Flacco will be better than 23? Room for improvement there, you think, with more time in the facility, Fred?
Are you talking about is the question about Travis Hunter?
No, the question's about Joe Flacco, because we were talking about Flacco very early on, and just sort of saying, well, you know what you're going to get from him. Chef Brian K is sort of saying,
Oh,
well, maybe we
the
get more.
23 season. I don't think you could do much better than he did there. He had never done that with the Ravens.
Right.
We watched him play for the Ravens. He just handed it off to Jamal Lewis and and he would make a play. They won on defense and he wasn't really a gunslinger, in what
Mm-hmm.
I recall him, you know, but I think he can be solid. I think that you know what you're getting with him. I don't necessarily think he's going to light up the NFL. I mean, he is what he is.
Right.
He takes care of the ball for the most part. He gets in trouble if he tries to, fit it in there or force it. I think he takes care of the ball better than Jameis Winston does. He still throws interception, as we saw, in that playoff game that single-handedly beat the Browns. I mean, they were in,
Mm-hmm.
when you give up 14 points, when the game's close. But I hope he's just able to be middle of the road. If he's middle of the road, they can win some games if they fortify their defense and get some more playmakers on the offense. So
Right.
that's what I'm talking about. I'm getting Hunter, a top end running back, maybe another tight end. So you can just flood. He can, David Njoku, a lot of people forgot. He really exploded in those 5 games. That's what gave
Yeah.
everybody so much hope. And he went to the Pro Bowl. And then last year he was hurt most of the season, but he wasn't really doing a lot. So, I mean, I think the hope is that the tight end becomes a big part again. And if
Mm-hmm.
Njoku can be like a wide receiver and you got a running game, think of that too. Flacco didn't have a running game really. That was the year Chubb was hurt.
Right.
And, they weren't running the ball that great. So that's why I want the focus on getting the running game going and getting yourself, a top end running back. And hopefully Nick Chubb comes back and you got 2 of them and get that running game going, makes the play action pass all the better.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Speaking
not
of,
expecting him to be, a Pro Bowler, but
no,
um, you
but you'll
don't
get
have to
competent
be.
quarterback play, which is a big step forward from 2024. The Cleveland Browns, by the way, looking at tight ends, Elijah Arroyo from Miami, Mason Taylor from LSU, both up here, both looking somewhere maybe 3rd round picks, late day 3 pick of a tight end. Does that make sense to you, Fred?
Well, yeah, you don't know, but as many as they brought in, I mean, I think the kid from Bowling Green they brought in, and
Bannon, yeah.
Taylor from LSU, and Arroyo, and um, just depends on a run on them. There's 5 of them in the top 50, so I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Tight ends usually aren't in that great demand that
Mhm.
you could get him in the third round. You have 2 third-round picks. I think you could definitely get one in those first 4 picks. I mean, I think the um, end of the third round or top of the fourth round, but
That
they
seems
should be
like the
able to get
right
a reading.
Yeah, that seems like the right zone to pick up a number two tight end and something to look out for. Question from E. Gillen: Is it realistic to believe Flacco and Pickett can last the season at quarterback? No rookie seems ready. I mean, that's a good point. Flacco hasn't played a full season the last couple of years. Not necessarily because of injury, just circumstances, that he's had. But do you think that they can last the full season? And then if you've got a Jalen Milrow, you'd be in the unlucky circumstance of having to trot him out there if you lose both those guys.
Well, I mean, you look the last few years, I mean, it's not good. Last year they played 4 different starting quarterbacks. The year before, 5 different starting quarterbacks. Um, I don't know how many the year Baker Mayfield got hurt. I mean, it has not been, they definitely haven't had one play the whole season the last 3 years under
Right,
Deshaun Watson. So you have to almost account that your third quarterback's going to play somewhere. And I don't believe they would keep 4. They'd have one
hmm
on the practice squad, but there's a good chance you're going to see whoever's on the roster for sure. And
right,
that's how it is in the NFL. And with the Browns, seems like other teams can play a quarterback the whole year, but every year the Browns go through all of them. And so
right. Yeah. Bailey Zappi's still available, so I don't think he signed anywhere, so we could bring him back.
he went
Um,
back to the Chiefs.
oh, he went back to the Chiefs. Well, there you go. No Bailey Zappi. What are we gonna do? Oh, geez, oh Pete. Let's talk about Amatori's question. He said, could they do the Pittsburgh strategy, just go year to year with some vet, remain competitive, and then eventually find the guy? I think that's like the opposite of what you were talking about, Fred, in terms of a team finishing, 7-10 or 8-9, and hoping that a quarterback will be available to them at pick 12.
Yeah, I think the Steelers are in no man's land. I've talked to some of their people, that cover them, and they're just good enough to either just sneak into the playoffs, but they've lost what 8 years in a row in the first game. It's see, that's the difference. But you put a Joe Burrow on that team, they're probably competing for the Super Bowl
Mm,
every year, and so that's why it's such a big deal. And how do you get there? The Colts during their run lucked out so much to say, using a pun there, is that Peyton Manning got hurt the year Andrew Luck was coming
right,
out, and he was no question the number 1 pick in the draft. And so they had a lousy year. So they went from Manning to Luck,
right,
and the Bengals, you can't say it was anything more than just pure having the right year to tank and have a lousy year. Burrow was clearly the number 1 pick in the draft. And,
right.
there's been people that were sure a guy would be good, but when they're at that level, it's hard to mess it up.
No,
And,
Burrow was a sure
unfortunately,
thing.
the Browns have a 3-14 year, and there's not a guy sitting there or 2 guys sitting there. So you could say, we don't care who the Titans take. They're both great. We'll take either
Right.
one of them. They're sitting
Yeah,
here
we
with one here, and everybody else perceives a big drop to the second one.
right. You were talking about Ben Roethlisberger, right? The concern that Shadur Sanders is, but Ben Roethlisberger was no doubt a top 10 pick, right? Back in 2004. The Browns should have grabbed him. The Browns were all over him at the combine, but Butch Davis decided he wanted Kellen Winslow Jr. Instead. But the Steelers have been in this situation now for a while where they're just competent enough to be able to not get a quarterback, and it's it's a darn shame that they are finding out what struggles the Cleveland Browns have gone through over the years.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
don't
really bad
know
about that.
if you'd rather just get in the playoffs every year and really not have a chance. I mean, I think most Browns fans would like to be competitive like that, but you really want to feel like you have a chance. And
Right.
until you have that guy, I don't know if you feel like you have a chance, when the season starts.
Yep. Comment from Junkyard Justin. Junkyard Justin says the quarterback room is setting up for Jackson Dart or Will Howard. Taller, good armed pocket passers, Hunter at 2, trade up late second for Dart or Howard. And that's kind of what we were talking about before, right, Fred? Your theory that Stefanski is molding the offense in the image of these bigger, taller pocket passers. Jackson Dart has some mobility. Will Howard has some mobility, but they're not, that's not their primary weapon. What do you think of Will Howard, Fred? I mean, you got a chance to see him during the season. Is he somebody you would take a flyer
I
on?
like this playoff run. Um, I wasn't very happy with him when they played Michigan. I thought he single-handedly, pretty much other than the play calling, lost the game through the interceptions. Kind of how I felt about. I'm not too high on Kyle McCord either, and that's probably more of Ohio State bias. But I like Will Howard better than him. I like him a lot, but I don't know if he's a. I don't know what's held it back where he's not being talked about as being that great of a quarterback.
Mm,
Um, so he's got the size and seemed like he's got the arm, but you got to differentiate. You knock down Sanders because he's throwing against weaker competition, but he's throwing to Travis Hunter. Well, Will Howard's got an all-star cast of NFL wide receivers and running backs and offensive linemen. So, I mean, it's hard to know if it's him or the players around him. So that's
right.
what I just don't think you take him thinking he's going to be the guy, because if you did, why wouldn't you draft him higher than, what he's saying, second round or something? And
Right.
leads me to the question. Let's say you get to 33, you can't trade up, and Jackson Dart and Milrow are both there. Who do you take?
Who do I take personally? I take Milrow, but the Browns might take Dart if, in fact, they are looking at this particular, type of quarterback
Skill
as
set.
being more likely to be successful in Stefanski's system. Who would you
The
take?
wild card is Tommy Reese. If he's saying we got to get this guy Milrow at all costs, or if he
True.
says, I've been there, I just don't think he's ever going to amount to. He's a great runner, but I don't know if he's ever going to get it, because I worked with
Mm-hmm.
him, that kind of stuff. So
Right.
that'll all unfold, but you're not going to know unless they have the choice. If, say, Dart's gone and Sanders gone, Ward's gone, the only guy there is Milrow, you say, oh, because they'll say that's who we wanted all along. Well, you
Right.
really don't know that,
Right.
because you're not going to say that about any of the guys that went somewhere else. So it'd be interesting if they were all there. Say Sanders
Mm-hmm.
was even there. Sanders, Dart, and Milrow. Who would they
Right.
take?
Yeah. Well, Rees would have a vote, I'm sure, and would undoubtedly make his opinion known on Milrow. Let's talk about running backs for a second. Chubb, according to Superfly Rob, Chubb was being Batman again, lifting near 600 pounds. And when are we going to hear something about bringing him back? Our anticipation here was that the Browns might do something before the draft, but with Cam Skataboo out there and Quinshon Junkins and Travion Henderson and such a deep running back class this year, it just makes sense for the Browns to wait, doesn't it, Fred? To see who they get in the draft and then figure out if there's a place for Chubb.
Yeah, I mean, but I'd say even if they get two backs, why wouldn't you have, say, you got Henderson and Scattaboo? Why wouldn't you bring
Mm,
Chubb back as your third? Move on from four, unless you just
right.
have him as the fourth and let him return kicks or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just don't see the upside of not having Nick Chubb. I mean, he's a fan favorite. He's going to cost you like on that qualifying offer, we're assuming is like 1.5 million,
Mm-hmm.
against the cap. So that's like minimum. And it's just to feel good. And he could be the Nick Chubb of old. I mean, if he's squatting this, that's what he was doing when he was Superman or
Mm-hmm.
Batman. So I keep, as I wrote, I feel that they have to have some type of an agreement with him that they're not worried that he's going to sign somewhere else, or
Right.
that if some team comes in and says, "Hey, we'll give you this amount," unless it's outlandish, and I don't think anybody's going to do that. With all the, if they need a running back, they're going to draft one and pay him minimum.
Right.
So that's, yeah. But if they draft two, he might say, well, gee, I don't want to come back. So I
Right.
don't know if maybe that's the approach they're taking. So they don't have to, tell him we don't want him.
Right.
I just don't, I saw him put out something about they said I'm done and all that. Who said he's done? I
Mm-hmm.
think he could really have a big year, maybe not be the front, but what if he is? I mean, even if he comes back to near what he was before the injury, he'd be my number one back. I don't care
Mm-hmm.
if you get Henderson and Scattaboo. He's your one back, and they're right there. And they learn
Right.
from him, and they start working their way in like he worked his way in behind Carlos Hyde. I'll never forget that. Hugh Jackson put him in against the Raiders. I think he went 60 yards on his first carry. Then he had him on the bench the whole game. He put him in again. He had a 45-yard run for a touchdown. He had 3 carries for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. We're like, Hugh, why aren't you playing Chubb? Well, and then John Dorsey must ask him the same question because he traded Carlos Hyde that week, if you remember.
Yeah. You remove Hugh's temptation to play Carlos Hyde and get Nick Chubb on the field, make Hugh successful in spite of himself. Not that that worked. All right. Well, I personally, I love Cam Skataboo and I love Travion Henderson. Those are two of my favorite backs in this draft. If Trent Henderson can stay healthy, he is very dangerous. All excellent in all phases of the game. You get me into next season with Ford, Henderson, or Skataboo, and Chubb as the backs. I'm willing to go to war with that. That seems like a pretty good running back room to me. I'd be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I mean they're there. I mean, it's just what they prioritize and make it happen. So I think it's right there. The table's set for them. They haven't made any moves at running back. They haven't made any moves at wide receiver. They haven't really made any moves, at most of the skill positions. So you have to think they're looking at the draft to add guys that can step in and play and contribute immediately.
Right, right. And with the cap situation that they have right now, they need some of these rookies, these cheap rookies, to be very effective and step in and really help them balance that cap. Give them some value at those positions. All right. Well, we are bouncing up against 8 o'clock. And so Fred and I are going to bid adieu here in just a minute. We want to thank you guys for watching, for all the comments in the chat room, which I adore. Really appreciate those. And we will be back on Thursday, Fred and I, in some capacity on the first night of the draft. Wednesday will be the special show. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you're going to get more than your fill of web dorks and legends and the rest of the OBR staff as we cover every minute of the NFL draft. So we hope you tune in for that Draft Cave 2025. And that's pretty much it. So good night, everybody. We will see you again next Wednesday. For Fred Greetham, I'm Barry McBride. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.